Welcome to the debate. I want you to picture a scenario that is playing out in corporate headquarters, well, all over the world right now. A CIO walks into a board meeting beaming with pride. They've just spent, 8 months and $5 million deploying a state-of-the-art generative AI infrastructure. It's secure, it's compliant, it's trained on all their proprietary data. It is, technically speaking, a masterpiece. And then the CEO asks the one question that matters. Okay, but is anyone actually using it?
And that, right there, is the moment the room goes quiet. Because if they're honest, the answer is usually no. Or, at best, a few enthusiasts in IT are using it, but everyone else is pretty much ignoring it.
Parking them in the garage, and then wondering why our commute hasn't gotten any faster. The premise we are debating today is that this failure has, nothing to do with the technology itself. The silicon is fine, the code is flawless, the problem is wetware. It is a human behavior problem.
Wetware, you make us sound like broken components. But I do agree with the premise. The industry is obsessed with deployment, getting the software live, and completely blind to adoption, getting the human to actually care. To solve this, we are going deep into the technology adoption model, or TAM. This is the framework developed by Dr. Fred Davis way back in 1989. It's kind of the grandfather of user acceptance theory. But we aren't just doing a history lesson. We're analyzing how a specific entity, winningteamai.com, is attempting to operationalize this theory to solve the AI crisis. They argue that you can't just wish for adoption, you have to manufacture it.
And that is precisely where our paths diverge. TAM relies on two pillars: perceived usefulness, does this help me, and perceived ease of use, is this thing hard to do? Winning Team AI claims you can engineer those perceptions through system design.
And I believe they are right. I'm taking the position today that adoption is primarily an execution challenge. It is, at its core, a design problem. If you build the right workflows, if you structure the environment correctly, you don't need to win hearts and minds. The behavior will follow the path of least resistance.
And I completely disagree. I'm representing the psychological and human perspective. You're treating AI like it's just a faster calculator. It's not. It's an entity that mimics human thought. And that triggers deep, primal fears: fear of replacement, fear of exposure, fear of obsolescence. If you build a perfect workflow but ignore the fact that the user is terrified of the tool, your system will fail. You simply cannot engineer your way out of an emotional crisis.
Well, let's test that theory. I want to start with my core thesis, because I think the industry has been looking at this backward for, at least 5 years. The source material from Winning Team A makes a statement that I find incredibly grounding. Technology succeeds or fails in the mind of the user.
Now, you might claim that for the psychological side, but I argue it's an engineering constraint.
How is the mind of the user an engineering constraint? That sounds like a contradiction.
It's not. Think about why adoption initiatives usually fail. We see the symptoms: low engagement, or what the industry calls shadow processes, where people revert to their old spreadsheets because, they trust them. Why does that happen? It happens because organizations treat adoption as a marketing campaign. They send a go-live email, maybe hold a lunch and learn, and just assume the job is done. Right. The field of dreams strategy. If we build it, they will come. Spoiler alert, they rarely do.
Precisely. My argument, the systemic perspective, is that you cannot change minds by asking nicely. You change minds by changing the environment of work. Winning Team AI's approach is to take those abstract TAM concepts, usefulness and ease of use, and treat them as variables to be manipulated. They don't ask, how do you feel about this tool? They ask, how can we design the friction out of the choice? If you design the workflow correctly, specifically through what they call guided AI workflows, you bypass the need for motivation. You solve the human problem by engineering a path where using the AI is actually easier than avoiding it.
See, I don't disagree that mechanics matter. Nobody wants to use a clunky tool that takes 10 clicks to do one thing. But I think you are fundamentally underestimating the why. My core thesis is that AI amplifies adoption risks in ways that standard enterprise software never did. I mean, when we introduced Microsoft Word, typists weren't afraid the software was going to become sentient and take their pension.
No, but they were afraid of looking incompetent if they couldn't learn it.
Sure, but the stakes with AI are existential. The source material is very specific about this. It warns about fear of replacement and fear of exposure. This idea that the AI will reveal that I'm not as smart as I pretend to be. There's also the mistrust of opaque systems. These are visceral emotional barriers. You can make a tool incredibly easy to use. That covers one half of the TAM equation. But Dr. Davis's model works like a multiplication problem. If perceived usefulness is 0 because I'm terrified the tool makes me redundant, then adoption is 0. It just doesn't matter how easy the button is to click.
So you're saying the fear overrides the function.
Always. I argue that winning team AI's approach works not because they engineer better workflows, but because those workflows create psychological safety. You have to address the vulnerability before you can optimize the process. You are trying to speed up the car. I'm trying to convince the driver that the car won't kill them.
I think that's a dramatic way to put it, but let's dig into that fear versus function dynamic. Let's look at the first core topic of our debate, reframing perceived usefulness. This is where I think the systemic approach really creates the bridge.
Go on.
The traditional mistake, and the text highlights this, is that companies introduce AI by listing capabilities. They say, look at this large language model. It can write Python code. It can generate poetry. It can summarize PDF.
Right. The Swiss Army knife pitch, which leaves the average user asking, okay, cool party trick, but what do I actually do with it on a Tuesday morning?
Exactly. It creates cognitive load. The user has to bridge the gap between capability and my job. Winning Team AI shifts the engineering question to what does the specific role need to accomplish? They map the technology to the stakeholder. The breakdown in the source material is honestly brilliant here. For executives, usefulness isn't about writing emails. It's engineered around decision velocity and risk reduction. For managers, it's forecasting. For employees, it is specifically daily task relief.
It is a logical segmentation. I'll give you that. It cleans up the mess.
It's more than logical. It's a mechanism for immediate buy-in. By defining the utilities so strictly for each role, you aren't asking them to figure it out. You are handing them a solution to their biggest headache. If I am an overworked analyst drowning in spreadsheets, and you show me a tool that cuts my data entry time in half, my perceived usefulness skyrockets instantly. I don't care about fear of replacement in that moment. I care about getting home to see my kids. That is an execution strategy.
You make it sound so rational. Human sees benefit, human accepts benefit. But humans aren't rational economic actors, especially in the workplace. Let's look at that executive example you just gave. You said the engineered utility is decision velocity.
Correct. Faster, better decisions.
Okay, apply the psychological lens. If I'm a VP and my value to the company, the reason I get the big bonus is my gut instinct and my years of experience, then you show me a black box AI that makes decisions faster and arguably better than I can. Does that increase my perceived usefulness, or does it trigger an identity crisis?
I think executives are pragmatic enough to value the result. If the stock goes up, they're happy.
I think you're overestimating their confidence. The source explicitly mentions fear of exposure. If the AI is doing the forecasting better than the manager feels their judgment is being obsoleted. The nuance here, which the engineering view kind of glosses over, is that for perceived usefulness to actually work in the context of AI, the user has to be convinced the tool is an assistant, not a replacement.
I don't disagree with the distinction, but how do you achieve that? I mean, you can't just send a memo saying, don't worry, you're safe, words are cheap.
You achieve it by framing, but also by the interaction design. The source notes that AI must be tied to daily task relief. That phrasing is crucial. It signals this takes the heavy lifting, the grunt work off your plate so you can do the high-value strategy work. If you just engineer the system to do the job, the human feels pushed out. If you frame the utility as support, the human feels empowered. That is a psychological victory, not a technical one.
Look, I see why you prioritize the framing, but I would argue that framing falls apart the moment the user hits a technical snag.
This leads us to the second and I think most critical topic: ease of use versus habit formation.
The second pillar of TAM?
But with generative AI, we have a new problem that standard software never had: the blank screen.
The tyranny of the blinking cursor?
It is paralyzing. You can frame AI as a helpful assistant all day long, but if the user sits down, opens ChatGPT or Copilot, and has to figure out how to prompt it to get that task relief you promised, you've lost them. They stare at the box, they type something vague, they get a bad result, and they conclude, this thing is stupid.
Or worse, I am stupid.
Exactly. They close the tab and go back to Excel. Why? Because the cognitive effort to learn prompt engineering is higher than the pain of doing it the old way.
It's the friction coefficient.
Winning Team AI solution is removing complexity through guided AI workflows. They don't give users tools. They don't say, here is a chatbot. They give them answers, drafts, and decisions. The quote that really stands out to me is, users never face a blank screen.
That is a strong operational principle, I'll admit.
It's an engineering triumph. They embed these workflows into existing meetings and processes. They say, habit beats training. If you put the AI exactly where the work is already happening, inside the document they're already writing, inside the meeting invite they just accepted, you bypass the need for the user to summon the willpower to use it. You argue for psychological safety. I argue that if you make the system so integrated that using it is easier than not using it, the psychological barriers just dissolve. The ease of use becomes absolute.
That is a compelling argument for efficiency. But I want to push back on this idea that habit beats training simply by proximity. Have you considered what happens when the existing habit is actually a bad one?
What do you mean?
The source talks about shadow processes, people reverting to old tools. If my habit is avoidance, simply putting the AI in the meeting isn't enough. In fact, it might be intrusive. If I'm in a meeting trying to hide the fact that I haven't done the reading, and the AI pops up summarizing the reading I didn't do, I feel exposed.
But if the AI provides a draft instantly, avoidance is harder work than acceptance. You're fighting gravity.
Only if the interface doesn't intimidate me. The source mentions that ease of use is incredibly fragile. It says if a user finds an interface confusing, adoption stalls immediately. My critique of your engineering stance is that you view these guided workflows as efficiency shortcuts. I view them as anxiety reducers.
Explain the distinction.
Think about the junior employee. When they face a blank screen with an AI, they feel stupid. They worry they won't ask the right question. They worry about hallucinations. By providing a pre-structured, step-by-step workflow, click here to generate market analysis, Winning Team AI isn't just saving clicks. They are saying it is safe to click this button. You cannot mess this up. You cannot break it. They are preventing cognitive overload. You are essentially hand-holding the user through their own insecurity.
I'm not convinced by the hand-holding narrative. It implies the user is fragile. I view the user as busy. The source says people don't want tools, they want answers. That strikes me as a demand for efficiency, not a plea for emotional support.
It can be both. But if the user feels stupid using the tool, they won't care about the efficiency. They will protect their ego first. Ego is the strongest force in the corporate world, stronger than profit.
Let's test that theory about ego and protection, because there is one area where the clash between engineering and psychology is most violent: measurement.
Ah, yes, the panopticon. Topic 3, psychological safety versus metrics.
The source material raises a critical tension here. Adoption fails when people feel judged, monitored, or exposed. Yet, as an operations person, I know the golden rule. You cannot manage what you do not measure.
But what you measure matters.
Agreed. And this is where the systemic approach is superior. Most companies measure vanity metrics. How many licenses did we buy? How many people log in once? That tells you nothing about adoption. That just tells you how much money you spent. Winning Team AI pivots to measuring behavior change over time and workflow penetration.
Which sounds remarkably like surveillance to a skeptical employee. Workflow penetration? It sounds like my boss is watching every keystroke to see if I'm working hard enough.
It's data-driven management. If you track the frequency of use, you can identify where adoption is stalling. You can see, Okay, the marketing team isn't using the copywriting workflow. That allows leaders to intervene before the initiative collapses. You can ask, is the workflow broken? Do they need more training? Is the output bad? This feedback loop is the ultimate proof that adoption is an engineering problem. You iterate until it works.
I'm sorry, but intervening based on usage data is the fastest way to kill psychological safety I can think of. If I know my boss is looking at a dashboard that says I only used the AI twice this week, am I going to use it more, or am I going to game the system?
People game everything.
Exactly. I'm going to open the tool, let it run in the background, generate 5 useless drafts just to get my numbers up, and then go back to doing it my way. You haven't created adoption, you've created compliance theater.
So what's the alternative? Flying blind? Hoping the culture magically shifts through the power of positive thinking?
No. The alternative is what the source calls safe-to-use boundaries. The dissenter me champions the idea that winning Team AI succeeds because they establish guardrails. They define what is safe. They position the AI measurement as measuring the system's success, not the employee's compliance.
But notice what you just said. Guardrails, boundaries, those are engineering terms. You are conceding my point.
How so?
The guardrails provided by winning Team AI are what create that safety. By defining what is safe programmatically, systematically, the system allows for the behavior. You can't just tell people it's safe. You have to build a system that is safe. If you don't want them to leak data, you engineer the tool so it can't leak data. You create the safe-to-use boundary within the software workflow itself.
That is a fair point. I can't argue that the code doesn't matter, but I would argue that the boundary is meaningless if the culture doesn't support it. The source mentions that if users feel judged, adoption dies. That judgment comes from humans, from managers, not from the software. So even if you have perfect guardrails, if the culture is perform or else, the AI becomes a threat.
Winning Team AI's approach works because it encourages experimentation. That is a mindset shift they are instilling in the leadership alongside the software.
I think we're converging on the mechanism, even if we disagree on the motive.
Perhaps. But let's look at the habit beats training concept again. You mentioned it earlier. The source says Winning Team AI integrates AI into existing meetings and existing workflows.
Right. Where work already happens, that's the mantra. From your perspective, that's efficiency. But from my perspective, that is normalization. It is demystifying the technology. If AI is just another voice in the meeting or just another tab in the workflow, it loses its sci-fi intimidation factor. It becomes boring. And I think boring is the ultimate goal of psychological safety.
That's an interesting pivot. You want the most advanced technology in human history to be boring?
I want it to be mundane, like electricity. You don't fear the light switch. You don't worry that the toaster is plotting to take your job. When AI becomes infrastructure, when it's just the way we do the meeting notes, the fear evaporates.
I see where you're going, but I don't want it to be boring. I want it to be indispensable. The source concludes by saying the goal is to bridge the gap between innovation and everyday work. When it becomes indispensable, it's not because we tricked the user into feeling safe. It's because the user can no longer imagine doing the job without it. The perceived usefulness becomes so high it overrides the fear.
But they can only get to that stage if they survive the initial dip, the moment where they feel incompetent.
And they survive the dip because the system carries them across.
Or because the system respects their fragility enough not to drop them.
We are circling the drain on the chicken and the egg here. Let's bring this to a close. We've looked at the source material regarding Winning Team AI and the technology adoption model. We've argued execution versus mindset. As we wrap up, I want to summarize my position for the audience, especially for the leaders listening who are, staring at those low usage numbers.
Please, go ahead.
Winning Team AI succeeds, and this is the takeaway, because they do not treat TAM as a theory to be admired in a textbook. They treat it as an execution system. Organizations fail because adoption isn't designed intentionally. They buy the tool and hope for the best. My argument remains the transition from impressive technology to indispensable habit happens through the rigorous application of structure, mapping role-based values so the utility is undeniable, guiding workflows to remove the blank screen, and measuring behavior to create feedback loops.
You solve the human problem by building a better machine around the human.
And I respect that rigor. It is necessary, but I leave our listeners with this. Dr. Fred Davis's model is universal for a reason. Whether it was a spreadsheet in 1990 or a generative AI agent today, the mental filters are the gatekeepers. Perceived usefulness and ease of use are psychological states, not software features. While winning team AI systems are brilliant, their success rests entirely on respecting human nature. The need to reduce cognitive friction, the need to assuage the fear of replacement, and the need for safety. You can build the most efficient highway in the world, but if the driver is too terrified to turn the key, you aren't going anywhere.
Ultimately, we both agree with the source on one fundamental truth. The technology doesn't matter if the human element, the behavior problem, isn't solved first.
Absolutely. It is the only variable that truly counts.
So to our listeners, as you look at your own tech stack, the question is simple. Are you deploying tools for the data center, or are you designing for the mind of the user?
That is the question.
Thanks for listening to the debate.